Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in again. I'm going to do another segment on Synergetics and the Unified field. I want to explain a little bit about the formulas and a little bit about the theory that if we take away, as you'll notice, the spheres and replace them by a tensional field of gravity, which will hold the energy vectors into a stabilized form, as I've shown before in the model with rubber bands as acting as tensional embracement field, which acts once again as a hold and stay station for the energy vectors which are transversing the unit. Remember then that these vertexes, as we've gotten rid of the spheres, as tensional fields, can be likened or seen as an operational matrix wherein the great circle planes of the vector equilibrium in the icosahedron can act as great circle railroad tracks of energy wherein the different energies coming into what seems to be contact or close proximity at the vertex, weigh stations, hold stations, shunting stations, and then energy traversing upon its next leg upon the isotropic vector matrix. This is interesting because once again when we take away all of the spheres and replace them with tensional fields, we still have these same formulas, and we still have this transformation matrix, which shows, as I showed in the other videos, how the vectors will shift phase 90 degrees or 45 degrees to change their shapes into other polyhedrons. And then I showed in my last segment how the spheres are now tensors, tensional embracement fields or gravitational fields, which are holding the total number of vectors in the cube, can be transformed into the total number of vectors in the octahedron. The octahedron's vectors add f plus 1 so that it equals 4f to the third power plus 6f to the second power plus 3f plus 1, which is identical to the cube's tensional field, which holds the total number of vectors into their self-stabilizing intertriangulated form. These then tensional and vector components create volumetric embracement fields of frequency to the third power and their variations for the different shapes. So basically all I'm pointing out then is nature uses the isotropic vector tensor transformation matrix as its coordinate system, and this is the system then which nature uses to calculate, coordinate, stabilize, transform, and restabilize all of its multitudes of various systems. I appreciate you tuning in. I'm going to go over some interesting information about the 17 frequency polyhedrons, and I may as well do that right now. So let me go ahead and pick up this other board here and show you guys a little bit about the numerical interrelationship patterns which happen when the universe once again first began to expand at the very, very beginning of universal expansion. The universe creates a matrix at the 17 frequency polyhedrons which identify the neutron and proton interassociative proclivities and their interarrangeabilities. The 17-frequency tetrahedron has 918 vectors surrounding 919 volumes on each of its face planes. There are 4 face planes, 2 times 2. 918 times 2 is 1836. 919 times 2 is 1838. These are all triangular faces. A cube at 1700 in frequency has 613 spheres on each of its planes. It has 18 planes, which are square-faced. It also has 17 planes with 612 spheres, for a total of 21,438 spheres. Remember, we have these different planes where 613 times 3 is equal to 1,839. In the vector equilibrium, which is also called the cuboctahedron, the hexagonal planes have 1,919 closest packed spheres on 4 of its central planes. It also has on its triangular outer planes 918 vectors surrounding 919 volume. It also has 613 spheres on 3 of its central planes. Remember how these numbers are associating. 613 times 3 is 1,839. The cuboctahedron also has 613 spheres and spheres and spaces total on the outer square faces, and it has 6 of them. These are the same total number of spheres and spaces which exist on the 3 central planes of the octahedron of 17 frequency. We'll see then there's a dynamic here, sorry for disappearing, which is created within the various polyhedrons at 17 frequency, which start doing some interesting averages. Within the central sphere of these planes, if the hexagon is using the central sphere and the square cannot use it, the square will be ratioing 612 on 3 of its planes for 1,836. If the square is using the central ball on any of these planes, the hexagon will only be using 918 of them, ratioing at 1,836. This creates an interesting ratioing pattern which universe uses at the very beginning of its expansion process to ratio the mass of the electron, which ratios at 1 compared to the proton's rest mass of 1836, and the average of the squares and hexagons planes averaging at the neutron's rest mass of 1838.5. These are all very interesting considerations when we've been thinking about what we've been talking about in some of the other videos. I wanted to remind everybody that you can take the 4 central hexagonal planes of the vector equilibrium and you can fold them into Lissajous figures, like a figure 8 or infinity sign, also called a Bowditch curve, I believe. And so when you interconnect 4 of these, for instance, 17 frequency hexagonal central planes reconfigured in energy patterns of Lissauges figures, and you connect 4 of them into the 4 central planes and a recreation of the vector equilibrium, you'll notice then that you've folded up this circle, which can also be made as a hexagon. When folded as a circle, it becomes a spherical vector equilibrium. When folded as a hexagon, it becomes a regular vector equilibrium or cubo-octahedron. So what's interesting is we can see that those 919 or 918 around 1, ratioing these interesting numerical patterns within the nucleus of the atom. When it folds up then, the triangular faces are still 17 frequency, and then exhibit the 17 frequency triangular numerical patterns. When it folds up and is added together with the other 3 for 4 of the great circle planes, it also creates the squares of 17 frequency. I'm so sorry, yes. So the 17 frequency square on this folded up hexagonal plane within the vector equilibrium, once again, is creating a continuum of interesting numerical interrelationship patterns. Now, to close, I'm just going to go over real briefly something very interesting. Checking to see if this camera's still going. Good, I'm glad that it is. Remember once again, whenever you take out these spheres, which in this model are simply representing the tensional field which is holding these vectors or energy vectors in a stabilized form, you can take those out of the equation and replace them with tensional units or tensors. Something seems to be beeping. Let's see, make sure it's working for me. Okay, guys, I'm right back with you now. So what's interesting, what happens, you guys, I don't know if I need my glasses on. At the 17 frequency cube, I'm going to take a little bit of this away. Thank you for your patience. You saw what happens on the faces and planes of the 17 frequency polyhedrons. In the 17 frequency cube, you have 121,380 vectors, plus you have 117,912 volume. Tetrahedral volumes, as I've been explaining. If you add those together, you get 239,292 total energy interassociations. This equals 9,384 times 51 times 1/2 for 1/2 of a spin, which is something that all the nuclear particles are doing. I'm going to do another number in a second here, but remember what we have here, you guys. 938.4 mega electron voltage is our identification marker for the proton. 0.51 mega electron volts is the identifying marker for the electron. So now the vectors in volume in the 17 frequency cube, where we see what the spheres have already done with its interesting numerical relationship pattern, ratioing the neutrons rest mass with the protons rest mass at 1838.5 and 1836, is now ratioing its total vectors in volume at 9,384 times 51 times 1/2 spin, which is equal to the mega electron voltage of the proton times the mega electron voltage of the electron, powered up by 10 and 10 and 10. times that half spin. Very cool. And I'm going to go over once again what happens then in not that 17 frequency vector equilibrium, which we just were looking at, but in its next measure, 17 times 2 equals 34 frequency vector equilibrium, which is also called the cubooctahedron. Well, remember from one of my other lectures that there are exactly 800,088 vectors, and these break down into 9,384 times 6.625 times 2. Sorry, fellas. Thanks for putting up with me. Plus 9,384,000 divided by 92. 92 is the total number of naturally regenerative chemical elements times 6.625. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for tuning in. What I'm trying to explain once again is how there are interesting numerical interrelationship patterns which exist within the isotropic vector tensor transformation matrix. Here we see, I didn't write it down, let me write it down here. We've got the protons MeV of 938.4. We have 92 naturally regenerative chemical elements, and we have 6.625 times 10 to the negative 34 joules for Planck's constant. Planck's constant times 90,384,000 divided by 92 plus 9,384 times 6.625 times 2, total number of vectors in this polyhedron. I appreciate you guys' time. I hope you'll tune in. I'm going to be explaining a little bit more about synergetics and the 6-axis metric of the isotropic vector matrix. Holds numerical interrelationship patterns and identities which are either identical or very, very similar to those which we're finding within the nucleus of the atom. Remember, Bucky said that if physicists would like to understand how universe designed atoms and combinations of them in pure principle, all they need to do is study synergetics. Once again, you guys, I took them at face value and just started studying this stuff. I hope you'll study my other lectures. Hope you can appreciate what I'm trying to talk about. I'm going to come back to you soon. I'm going to explain how those 3 different metrics that I explained, or the 3 different scales within this metric, I apologize. The alpha scale, the Penn scale, proton, electron, neutron, and the quanta scale all measure with their vector ratios. It's at a higher frequency level. You see what happens at 17 frequency level? You're going to be amazed at what happens later. Thanks you guys for tuning in, and I'll see you around.